Micah Carter walked into her calculus class, expecting to be challenged. Instead, her professor smirked and said, "You're probably more of a stats girl." But when she aced the so-called impossible quiz, he didn't applaud, he accused her of cheating. And what happened next? It wasn't just one man's prejudice. It was an entire system trying to erase her. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was the kind of morning that smelled of privilege, fresh-cut grass, glossy campus maps fluttering in the hands of eager freshmen, and the casual clatter of bicycles coasting down red-bricked walkways. At the edge of the mathematics building, Micah Carter adjusted the single strap on her canvas bag and stepped inside her first class at Rutherford University. At 19, Micah didn't look like someone who belonged here, at least not to them. Her hoodie was worn, her jeans frayed at the seams, and her dark brown skin stood out against a sea of Patagonia vests and Nike Dunks. She walked with quiet precision, her face unreadable, eyes scanning the lecture hall like it was foreign territory. Professor Langston was already at the board when she arrived. Mid-50s tan blazer, silver temples, and that worn-down smugness of someone who believed they could never be challenged. He paused mid-sentence as she stepped in. Just for a second. Just long enough. Micah took a seat in the second row, not because she wanted to be noticed, but because she knew most students were too scared to sit that close. Langston turned back to the class. "Welcome to Calculus 305. This isn't high school algebra, and it's not your community college refresher either," he said, glancing pointedly at her. "Here, we separate the contenders from the passengers." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Micah said nothing. "Today," Langston continued, pulling out a stack of printed papers, "we'll begin with a quick diagnostic quiz. No calculators, just your brain, and whatever you remember from Calc 1 and 2. Consider it a little litmus test." He began handing out the papers, his gaze lingering a moment too long when he dropped Micah's on her desk. "Good luck," he said flatly. "You're probably more of a stats girl. Anyway." Micah's fingers tightened slightly around her pen. She glanced at the first problem, a sequence convergence proof. Easy. Her pencil moved smoothly, efficiently, each number flowing from her like breath. The room was filled with shifting chairs, erased mistakes, soft sighs of panic. Meanwhile, Micah worked in silence, her mind mapping each solution faster than she could write it. By the halfway mark, she was done. She flipped her paper over and waited. Langston noticed. He squinted at her, displeased. "You're done already." She nodded once. "Double check it. It's not a race." Micah didn't respond. She had already reviewed every step in her head twice. 10 minutes before time, she walked her paper to the front. Langston took it with a pinched smile. "We'll see if you're as quick as you are accurate," he muttered, loud enough for the students in the front row to hear. The rest of the class trickled in their papers as time expired. Langston, clearly relishing his performance, announced he'd grade a handful on the spot. He began at his desk, red pen in hand, muttering phrases like hopeless, needs work, and occasionally a surprised, not bad. Then he reached Micah's paper. The red pen hovered above the top margin, but didn't land. Silent. He flipped to the second page, then the third. His expression shifted, not confused, not impressed, irritated. Langston looked up, his eyes scanning the room, until they landed on Micah. She looked back, calm as still water. He stood, paper in hand. "Interesting. Very interesting." He didn't elaborate. Instead, he tossed the rest of the papers in a folder and snapped it shut. "Class dismissed. We'll discuss results Wednesday." As students packed up, whispers began to fly. "He never ends class early." "Who turned in early? That girl?" "Maybe she failed fast." Micah stood, lifted her bag over her shoulder, and left the room in silence, just as she had entered, except now, every eye followed her. The smug chuckles had turned into uneasy silence. Langston stayed behind at the lectern, still holding Micah's quiz in his hand. His thumb brushed the corner of the paper over and over, as if trying to wear it down. And then, slowly, with narrowed eyes, he turned the paper around to the final answer on the last problem, the one he thought he'd designed to be unsolvable without a formal proof. The final line of Micah's answer stared back at him. "It was correct." Perfect. Elegant. He set the paper down, leaned on the desk, and stared out at the now empty room. He picked up the class roster, found her name, and whispered to himself, "Micah Carter, let's see what else you're hiding." The second day of class broke with the same deceptive calm as the first. A pale morning light filtered through the tall windows of Rutherford's mathematics hall. Micah Carter arrived early, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her steps precise but slow. The corridors felt colder now, as if the walls themselves had turned wary. She entered the classroom, the same seats, same desks, same rows, but something had shifted. She could sense it before anyone spoke. The charged hush, a ripple of whispered speculation that circled her like ghostly hands. No one greeted her. Even the rhythm of fluorescent lights above seemed too loud. At the front, Professor Langston stood upright at the podium, with a yellowing file in his hand. The door clicked shut behind students filing in. Langston's spectacles glinted. His expression was unreadable. "Before we begin," he started, voice measured but low, like a knife blade hidden in silk, "I want to share some interesting findings from Monday's diagnostic quiz." Micah sat in her usual seat, second row, center. She scanned the room quickly. Whispers stopped. Eyes shifted. Murky suspicion pricked at the air like static. The boy to her right moved his chair just a bit. A subtle retreat. Langston tapped the manila folder again. It made a hollow sound. Out of 68 students, the average score was 63%. Fair for a review. He paused, and then he said, "One student, however, scored a 90. Fingers gripped around notebooks. Someone gulped. The silence was complete. Langston let that number hang in the heavy air. "Almost perfect," he continued, voice now tight. "Which would be remarkable, except that the student in question transferred from a community college just last week." The implication didn't need to be spelled out. The class waited, waiting for applause or jeers. Instead, nothing. "Now," Langston continued softly, "I'm not here to make accusations. Each word deliberate, nearly venomous in its restraint, but we do take academic integrity seriously at Rutherford." Micah's heart thudded, not in fear but in anger. She stared at Langston, eyebrows tight, lips pressed in a flat line. He hadn't said her name, but it was unnecessary. She could feel the weight of the accusation, hanging between them like a dark cloud. She remembered the quiz, how each answer had clicked in her mind, how she had worked it out logically, honestly. She remembered how she'd finished early, certain. Now that tally, 98. Her heart drummed. As soon as class ended, students filed out quietly. No one looked at her. No one offered a word. The avoidance was heavier than any insult. Langston lingered behind the desk, cataloging papers. At last he looked up and fixed his gaze on her. "Miss Carter, could you stay a moment?" She nodded, pack sliding from her shoulder. The room emptied, chairs scraping, lights humming, her breath steady. Her palms were cool, heart steady. Langston watched her put the door behind the last student. He folded his arms, voice low. "You scored the highest by a long margin. In fact, the kind of margin that raises eyebrows." Micah met his gaze. Her voice was steady. "Are you accusing me of cheating?" He smiled, thin, controlled. "Let's just say I'm curious. Either you memorized those problems in advance, or you found a clever way to borrow assistance." Micah's jaw clenched. "The quiz was unannounced," she said. Langston nodded once. "Exactly." Her heart pounded, but she did not waver. "I'll take it again. Right now. Same questions. Same room." He allowed himself a faint laugh, but there was no humor in it. "That's not how this works." "Why not?" Micah pressed, voice firm. He surveyed her face smoothed into an unreadable mask. "Because we don't redo tests just because someone feels they're being treated unfairly." Micah swallowed back impulse. It was never just the test. She recognized the pattern. Brilliance by a black woman must be interrogated. She met his eyes. Quietly, she said, "Would you be saying this if I looked like any of those boys in the back row?" His jaw came tight. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me?" He sounded unsteady, but that was only in her mind. Micah continued, softer but sharp. "Two of them finished early. You didn't call them in. Why single me out?" Langston's facade faltered. His mouth twitched. He said, "This isn't about race." "Then what is it about?" she asked, quiet but fierce. He stared at her. His eyes flickered. He said nothing. Instead, he reached into the folder and slid a yellow slip across the desk. Micah watched it float as if in slow motion. The paper lay yellow and crisp. He said, "This is a preliminary academic dishonesty report. It's not formal, yet, But it's on record. One more incident, and it becomes permanent. She stared at the slip. She didn't reach for it. She didn't touch it. She didn't let it bruise her. He added, voice soft, but insidious. You can appeal this, though I wouldn't recommend it. The committee trusts my judgment. Micah stood. She looked at him for a long moment, unspeaking, steady. Then she said, I'll see you next class, Professor. He watched her gather her bag. The silence held. His eyes flickered again, calculating, but something else lay beneath it. Fear. Micah walked out. Hallway light slanted across her back. She exhaled. Steady breathing. She walked straight to the dean's office. No hesitation. In the corridor she passed a banner reading, Academic Integrity First. The plaque underneath read, Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. Her lips curled briefly, iron in her spine. She reached the dean's office, heart thudding, not in fear, but in resolve. She knocked. The secretary looked up as Micah stood at the threshold. Her eyes lifted to the file piled on the desk behind her. One file with Micah's name on it, typed neatly. Official. You're Micah Carter, right? Said the secretary. Her voice was polite, but something in her eyes tightened. Micah swallowed. Yes, she replied simply. The secretary's phone sat blinking. The dry rustle of paper echoed. Then the secretary said softly, Professor Langston is expecting you. Silence fell. Micah walked toward the door behind the secretary, trained focus in her step. As the door closed behind Micah, the file on the secretary's desk shifted just slightly, and a folded photo slipped out onto the surface. Micah standing victorious at a math competition, her smile radiant. But someone had crossed out the first place ribbon with a red marker. Micah Carter stepped into the lecture hall at precisely 8:47 a.m., 3 minutes earlier than usual. Her bag strap creaked faintly as she made her way to the second row seat she'd silently claimed as hers. The room wasn't full yet, but the cold had changed. Not the air conditioning. The people. It was in the quiet shift of body language when she entered. The way conversations stopped mid-sentence. The way heads dipped down faster into phones. The same girl who had smiled at her on day one now kept her earbuds in and stared straight ahead. Micah was used to silence. Growing up homeschooled in a working-class black family, her life had been a symphony of focused solitude. But this silence was different. It wasn't neutral. It hummed with suspicion. It buzzed with the kind of judgment that came camouflaged in politeness, but sharp enough to cut deep. As she settled into her chair, she heard it from behind her. Two boys whispering. She's the one from community college, right? Yeah, the one Langston had to talk to. Figures. They let anyone in now. A low laugh followed. Not loud enough for faculty to hear, but loud enough to brand her memory. Micah didn't flinch. She didn't turn. She had been raised to believe in the power of restraint, but her knuckles were white around her pen. That same week, Langston assigned the semester's first group project, an applied calculus model to be worked on in teams of 3. Students immediately shifted in their seats, pairing off with friends or people they knew from previous classes. Micah raised her hand quietly and asked, Is there a sign-up sheet, or do we choose partners? Langston barely looked up from his attendance sheet. Choose your own groups. Efficiency is part of the assignment. She stood, walked to a nearby group of 2, and softly asked, Would you mind if I joined? The brunette girl blinked, then glanced at her partner. We're actually already full. Sorry. Micah blinked. It's a group of 3 though, right? Yeah. The boy said, We're just waiting for someone. Micah stepped back. She tried again with another group. They avoided eye contact, pretended to be checking the syllabus. When she returned to her seat, alone, Langston finally looked up. Well, Miss Carter, looks like you'll be doing this one solo. I'm sure you were used to working independently. There were a few chuckles, low and clipped. Langston's mouth twitched in what might have been a smirk. Micah stared straight ahead. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood the message. She didn't belong. By the end of that week, Micah was receiving a different kind of attention. Cold glances in the dining hall, whispered laughter that stopped the moment she walked past. She overheard bits and pieces. She's a charity admit. My cousin applied here with a 4.2 and didn't get in. But somehow she did. You know they have quotas now, right? And still, no one said it to her face. The next blow came silently. She had left her notebook in her locker overnight. A mistake she rarely made. When she returned the next morning, she found a piece of paper tucked inside, folded neatly, no name, no handwriting. Just a single phrase, scrawled in red marker, across the front. Affirmative action genius. Micah stared at it. Her breath caught, not in surprise but in something deeper. Something that tasted like humiliation mixed with fury. She unfolded the note. Inside was a sketch, crude and racist. A cartoonish figure with exaggerated features, hunched over a calculator that displayed the number 0. Her name was scribbled in block letters across the top. Micah. She folded the paper slowly and tucked it into the bottom of her bag. She said nothing. Report it? To who? Langston? A department that already had her under surveillance? No, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But the signs didn't stop. She began to notice that the shared class notes, the ones professors often encouraged students to collaborate on, never made it to her. She saw her classmates share flash drives, laugh over solution sets, high-five over tricky problems she'd had to solve alone in her dorm. It didn't help that her next 2 assignments came back marked with comments like lacks clarity, be more rigorous and unclear logic here, despite her steps being not only correct but more efficient than the standard method. She stayed after class once, quietly approaching Langston's desk. "Professor," she said, holding out her marked-up assignment. "I was hoping you could clarify this comment about my solution to number 5. I followed an alternate method that I cross-checked with the textbook." Langston barely glanced up. "Alternate doesn't always mean acceptable, Miss Carter. You should aim to demonstrate mastery, not cleverness. It's mathematically sound." She pressed gently. "I'm not interested in clever shortcuts," he said flatly. "If you're serious about succeeding here, you'll learn to follow the frameworks we teach." Micah nodded once. "Understood." She left, hands cold, mind racing. She hadn't broken a single rule. She hadn't cut corners. Her only mistake, it seemed, was being too competent in a space that didn't expect her to be. A week later, she walked into the library's study area and saw a group of students whispering and huddled around a phone. One of them glanced at her, whispered something, and the others laughed. Micah's stomach turned. She passed them, caught only the tail end of the screen. Her photo. Someone had taken a picture of her from behind in class, overlaid with the caption, "When you cheat the system but still don't get it." Her jaw clenched, but she walked on. She couldn't afford confrontation. Not here. Not like this. Then came the email. A message sent from an anonymous burner account. Subject: friendly warning. Body: drop the class before it gets worse. You know exactly what this is. No signature. No traceable IP. Just a digital version of the note she'd found in her locker. She stared at the screen for several seconds, then deleted the email. Later that afternoon, while waiting for the calculus lecture to start, she reached under her desk and felt something rough. Someone had etched into the underside with what must have been a key or blade. "You don't belong here." She pulled her hand away. Her heartbeat slowed, then steadied. She stared down at the carved words, not in fear, but in something harder. Rage disguised as resolve. She took out her notebook and started taking notes as Langston walked in. As Langston began the lecture, Micah opened her bag to grab a pen and found something new slipped inside. A black envelope with her name written in calligraphy. Inside, one line. "He's not done yet." The note in the black envelope haunted Micah for the rest of the day. Not because it scared her, but because it confirmed something she had suspected from the beginning. This wasn't just about proving herself. It was about someone trying to erase her. She unfolded the note again in her dorm, later that evening, eyes skimming the script. "He's not done yet." Whoever had written it knew exactly what they were doing. Calligraphy. Fancy paper. Not a threat, but a promise cloaked in class. It was more than Langston now. It was the institution, the culture, the quiet machinery built to keep people like her in check. That night, Micah sat at her desk, surrounded by calculus textbooks and problem sets she no longer trusted. Instead of studying, she opened an old flash drive. A familiar folder blinked open. Micah Math Awards. Inside, over a dozen PDFs and scanned certificates flashed across the screen. Headlines from local newspapers. Pictures of Micah at math tournaments, standing in front of whiteboards, holding state trophies, beaming in a room full of competitors who back then had underestimated her too. At 16, she had beaten out seniors from private prep schools at the Tri-State Advanced Calculus Challenge. At 15, she'd been the only non-male, non-white finalist in the National Math Bowl. Her scores had been peer-reviewed, her work lauded by former Olympiad judges. It was all documented, unquestionable. She had been homeschooled most of her life, not by accident, but by intention. Her mother, Dr. Vanessa Carter, had once been a senior systems engineer contracted with NASA, a black woman in aerospace long before diversity panels made it fashionable. She had given up promotions to raise Micah, choosing to channel her own brilliance into a curriculum tailored just for her daughter. From the time Micah could hold a pencil, math was language, rhythm, freedom. By age 12, she was solving college-level integrals. At 14, she had submitted a paper on alternate proof structures to a regional math journal. They published it without edits. Micah selected a few highlights from the flash drive and attached them to an email. She stared at the to field for a moment, then typed profit of langston-rutherford.ed. She didn't include a message, just the subject line, regarding my record, and clicked send. The next morning she received a reply. Just one sentence. These appear edited. I'll forward them to admin. No greeting, no signature, just that. Her stomach twisted. He wasn't even pretending anymore. By noon she called her mother. Vanessa answered on the second ring, voice warm as ever. Hey, baby girl. Micah took a breath. I need you to send something. All of it. The originals. From Tri-State, National Bowl, everything. Her mother didn't ask questions. She had taught Micah how to fight without raising her voice. I'll scan and email the packet by tonight. And I'll CC the department chair. What's their name? Micah paused. Dr. Alcott. He oversees the STEM division. Got it, Vanessa said. Let's put the whole truth on their desk. That evening the email went out. 6 attachments. 32 pages of proof. Her mother's message was crisp and direct. To whom it may concern. I am forwarding my daughter's official math competition records. All entries have been verified through national and regional authorities. Please advise if further documentation is needed. Sincerely, Dr. Vanessa Carter, Ph.D. Aerospace Systems. Micah waited. 1 day passed. Then 2. No reply. She emailed again. No response. Then on day 4, she went in person. Alcott's assistant blinked when she said her name. Oh, I think the dean's office is handling that now. Handling what? Micah asked. The assistant hesitated. It's protocol, I think. Protocol. The catch-all word for delay, diversion, denial. Micah stood in the hallway of the department office for a full minute after leaving the desk. Her fingers tingled. Her eyes didn't sting. But something inside her shifted. This wasn't about fairness. It never had been. This place didn't want excellence. It wanted obedience. Not brilliance, but docility. They had already written her narrative, and no number of certificates, no amount of math, was going to change it. So Micah stopped trying. She stopped raising her hand, stopped volunteering answers in lectures. She submitted her assignments on time. Yes, but without notes or color. She erased all flourishes from her proofs, gave them only what they expected. Bland, gray competence. She became invisible, until the flyer went up. Rutherford University presents the 37th Annual Calculus Gauntlet, open to juniors, seniors, and exceptionally qualified transfers. Grand prize, $3,000. Departmental honors. Preliminary sign-ups due by October. Micah stood in front of the bulletin board in the STEM hallway, backpack slipping down one shoulder. She read the rules, then read them again. Langston's name was there. Chief judge and problem designer. Micah didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the registrar's kiosk and submitted her name. That night, she received a cryptic unsigned message slid under her dorm door. One line only. He designs the questions. Are you sure you're ready to be humiliated? Publicly? The calculus gauntlet was more than a competition. It was ritual. At Rutherford, the gauntlet wasn't just an academic contest. It was spectacle, pedigree, and hierarchy rolled into one. The 3-hour exam was performed live, in a theater-style lecture hall, before a crowd of students and faculty. Contestants solved 20 brutal problems on whiteboards under the glare of lights and the sharper glare of judgment. Every misstep was public. Every stumble became legend. And every year, the same pattern repeated itself. White, male, upperclassmen dominated the board. By tradition, it was a proving ground for seniors, students who had spent years cultivating reputations. For freshmen, the gauntlet wasn't forbidden, but entering was unheard of. It was career suicide. Until Micah Carter. Her name appeared midway down the sign-up sheet, posted outside the STEM office, sandwiched between Kevin Harmon, Sr. and Bryce Langley. Jr. was an anomaly. Micah Carter, transfer. The reaction was instant. The hallway buzzed for hours, then days. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. By the end of the week, her entry had become a campus-wide rumor, a curiosity carried by text threads and cafeteria whispers. Does she even know what the gauntlet is? She couldn't even get a project partner now. She thinks she can beat Kevin Harmon. She's just trying to make a scene. Affirmative action theater. She'll drop before it even starts. Watch. Micah didn't respond to any of it. She didn't need to. Silence was her strongest armor. Langston, of course, was approached almost immediately. Students asked him in office hours. Reporters from the campus paper emailed him for comment. His response was a masterpiece of academic politeness, so polished it glistened with menace. Of course, we welcome all qualified students, he said with a practiced smile. Calculus doesn't discriminate, but let's just say I look forward to a spirited performance. Not encouragement, not neutrality. A blade wrapped in silk. Behind the scenes, other rumors began to surface. Langston had requested changes to the gauntlet structure this year. Instead of the traditional balance of pure proofs and standard applied problems, this year would lean heavily toward creative application. To outsiders, it sounded progressive, rewarding flexibility and innovation. But to insiders, it was clear. The changes favored those already comfortable with Langston's personal style, his love for obscure twists and unpredictable logic leaps. It was a trap. A public one. Micah heard the rumors. She even overheard someone in the library whispering that Langston had boasted about designing a problem that will make the pretenders choke. She understood. They weren't just waiting for her to lose. They were salivating for the spectacle of her humiliation. But Micah wasn't interested in giving them what they wanted. So she trained. Late nights became her sanctuary. While her dorm mates scrolled endlessly through social feeds or stumbled in from parties, Micah sat at her desk with her lamp casting a tight circle of light over stacks of paper. She filled notebooks with questions she wrote for herself, problems structured not for their difficulty, but for their cruelty. She created questions the way Langston might, layered, deceptive, with elegant traps hiding inside the simplest phrases. When she solved them, she didn't just aim for accuracy, she aimed for resilience. She practiced failing on paper and recovering gracefully. She rehearsed how to pause, breathe, erase, and restart without panic. If the gauntlet was theater, then she would train as if it were choreography. But she also trained differently than anyone expected. Micah blended pure mathematics with something else, intuition. Where others memorized solution frameworks, she visualized problems as shapes, patterns, flows of logic that moved through space. Integrals became rivers. Vectors became shifting arrows in a field. Limits became walls collapsing toward a point. She wasn't memorizing. She was seeing. It was a gift. One she had nurtured quietly since childhood. One no professor could strip away with red ink. By the second week of October, she could complete mock gauntlet sets in half the allotted time. She even timed herself. Trained under stress. Alarms blaring, TV static playing, people talking in the hallway. Nothing rattled her. Not anymore. Yet no one knew. She kept her training invisible. Her brilliance, her secret. The student body, meanwhile, remained fixated on her upcoming performance. She was no longer just a target of ridicule. She was campus entertainment that circulated on student forums. Which question would make her fold? Would she storm out halfway through? Would Langston have to rescue her with extra hints? Her name had become a punchline, and Langston let it fester. He never named her directly in class, but his comments became sharper, more pointed. One day, while lecturing on mathematical elegance, he paused mid-sentence. Sometimes, he said, chalk tapping the board, students mistake brute force and overconfidence for true understanding. They believe that speed equals mastery, but elegance is about restraint, about knowing the difference between knowing and performing. A few heads turned toward Micah. She didn't blink. He smiled faintly, erased the board, and moved on. A week before the gauntlet, the university released a notice. It was taped to the registrar's door, posted on the website, and emailed to all participants. New rule for 2025, all first-year and transfer applicants must pass a pre-gauntlet qualifier. It had never been required before. Not once in the gauntlet's 37-year history. But there it was. Bold, official, undisputed. And there was only one first-year transfer signed up. Micah Carter. The campus exploded with laughter. They made a rule just for her. Someone jeered in the dining hall. Screenshots of the notice circulated on group chats with captions like, Micah's speed run to embarrassment begins, and even Rutherford wants her filter. Micah read the notice once. Then again, her pulse didn't quicken. Her hands didn't shake. She folded the paper into her notebook and walked back to her dorm, silent as ever. But that night, when she returned from the library, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Black paper, white ink, calligraphy, the same style as before. She tore it open. Inside, one sentence. He designs the qualifier. Are you ready to be humiliated publicly? Her eyes scanned the page. At the bottom, in faint ink, was a signature. One word. Unmistakable. Langston. The qualifier was set for 3 days later. Micah stared at the envelope and whispered to herself, then I'll show you what humiliation really looks like. The notice about the pre-gauntlet qualifier spread like wildfire across campus. Screenshots flooded group chats. Jokes circulated. Memes appeared overnight. One showed a cartoon guillotine, labeled qualifier with Micah's head hovering underneath. Another depicted Langston as a knight protecting the gauntlet, sword raised against an intruder. No one pretended it was about fairness. Everyone understood. The rule wasn't about raising standards. It was about building walls. The morning of the qualifier arrived gray and wet. Rain slicked across the cobblestones of Rutherford's campus, puddles reflecting the tall arches of the math building. Students filed in and out of lecture halls with umbrellas and laptops. But Micah moved differently. She walked slowly, steadily, her hood pulled low, her bag heavy with textbooks she didn't need, but carried anyway. She was the only one summoned. The email had been clear.
Ms. Carter, report to room 207 for your pre-gauntlet qualifier. Time, 10 a.m. Duration, 90 minutes. Closed session.
No other names. No group of peers. Just her. When she arrived, the hallway outside room 207 was empty. Too empty. As if students had been warned not to linger. A single teaching assistant stood at the door. A tall, pale graduate student, with glasses slipping down his nose. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been drafted into a game he didn't want to play. You're Micah? He asked, voice tight. She nodded. He cleared his throat and gestured inside. This way. The room smelled faintly of chalk dust and lemon disinfectant. A single desk sat in the center with a thick packet of stapled papers. A clock ticked loudly at the back wall. The TA hovered near the door, arms folded, not meeting her eyes. Instructions? Micah asked, pulling her pen from her bag.
90 minutes.
No calculators. Just do your best, he muttered. His tone was flat, as if he was reciting lines handed to him. Micah flipped through the packet once, scanning the first 3 pages. Her stomach tightened, not in fear but in recognition. These weren't standard gauntlet problems. These were lifted straight from graduate-level textbooks, nonlinear differential equations, topology-heavy proofs, measure theory problems that weren't even part of undergraduate curriculum. Problems no first-year student, no matter how talented, was supposed to know. This wasn't a qualifier. It was sabotage. She took a breath, pressed her pen to the page, and began. For a while the room was silent, except for the scratch of her pen and the steady tick of the clock. The problems were monstrous, each one a labyrinth designed to devour confidence. But Micah approached them differently. Where another student might panic, she stripped each problem down, reducing it to shapes and flows she could see. She didn't always know the formal graduate-level approach, but she could dismantle the problem's skeleton, build bridges across gaps, and carve her own paths. At the halfway mark, the TA peeked over her shoulder. His eyes widened. He didn't say anything, but his grip on the clipboard tightened. By the time the clock ticked 60 minutes, Micah had solved nearly every problem, not with polished, textbook-perfect language, but with logic too sharp to dismiss. At 70 minutes, she flipped the last page over, placed her pen on the desk, and stood. I'm finished, she said quietly. The TA blinked. You still have 20 minutes. I'm done, she repeated, sliding the packet toward him. Her face gave nothing away. He hesitated, then took it. His eyes scanned the first page again. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He looked stunned, but he said nothing. Micah lifted her bag, adjusted her hood, and walked out. The rain had stopped by the time she stepped outside. Sunlight broke faintly through the clouds, slanting against the wet stones. Students hurried past, oblivious to what had just happened in room 2 to them. The story was already written. She would fail, and the gauntlet would be safe from intrusion. Micah walked slowly back to her dorm, her expression unreadable. She knew what she had done. She knew the answers weren't flawless, but they were correct enough to terrify anyone who had been told she didn't belong. 2 days passed.
Nothing.
No email. No posted results. No mention of her qualifier at all. Whispers started again in the hallways. Did she even show up? Maybe she bombed so badly they're sparing her the embarrassment. Bet they don't even list her name.
Micah ignored them.
She studied quietly in the library, ate alone in the cafeteria, returned to her dorm each night with the same ritual silence. She wasn't waiting for validation. She was waiting for the inevitable. On the third morning, she passed the bulletin board outside the registrar's office. A new sheet of paper was pinned up. Official gauntlet contestants. She scanned the list quickly. Kevin Harmon, Bryce Langley, 4 other seniors, 2 juniors. Her name was not there. The line of students behind her shuffled, reading over her shoulder. Someone chuckled softly. Told you she wouldn't make it. Micah stepped aside, her face calm. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply walked away. But inside, something tightened. Not defeat, not shame, resolve. That night a message appeared under her door again. The same black envelope. Inside one line. You're not just out. You were never supposed to enter. The list had been posted. Her name was missing. For most of Rutherford, the story ended there. The transfer student had tried, failed, and vanished. The system had worked, but systems are never silent for long. Sometimes, the truth slips through the cracks. The faculty lounge at Rutherford was a place of whispered arrogance. Leather chairs, stale coffee, the faint echo of laughter bouncing off bookshelves. On a Thursday afternoon, just 2 days after the gauntlet list was finalized, Professor Langston leaned back with a paper cup in hand. A few colleagues chuckled nearby, swapping stories about undergraduates who confused vectors for scalars. Langston smirked. His eyes glinted. Well, at least the circus is over, he said. I had a student who thought she could muscle her way into the gauntlet. A freshman transfer. Imagine the headline, Community College Genius Outsmarts Us All. He let the sarcasm drip. The others laughed. Langston leaned forward, savoring the punchline. I told them I'll let her compete when pigs fly through derivatives. The lounge erupted. But what Langston didn't know was that a teaching assistant sat in the corner, laptop open, phone propped against a notebook. The red light on the camera was so small, so discreet, it blended with the glare of fluorescent lights. Every word was caught. That night, the TA uploaded the 30-second clip. No caption, no commentary. Just the file, Langston Lounge. The internet took care of the rest. By dawn, the video had spread across Twitter and Reddit. The quote, I'll let her compete when pigs fly through derivatives was screenshotted, memed, remixed into TikToks. Someone drew an animation of a pig with wings solving equations mid-air. Another made a looping gif of chalkboards sprouting wings. But beneath the jokes, anger seethed. Hashtags surged. Let Micah compete. Rutherford bias. Math is for everyone. Students at other universities began tagging their own STEM departments. Alumni chimed in, saying they'd seen the same culture of exclusion. Black STEM organizations reposted the clip with statements of solidarity. By evening, thousands of signatures had appeared on an online petition demanding Micah Carter's reinstatement. Micah saw it unfold in real time. She had been in the library, her laptop open to a blank Word document, when her phone buzzed. A text from a high school friend. You're trending. Micah frowned, tapped the link, and the video filled her screen. Langston's face, his voice, that laugh. Her chest tightened, not with surprise but with something darker. Confirmation. The cruelty she'd endured privately was now public. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the rising numbers on the petition page. 10,000 signatures, then 15,000, then 20. For the first time since arriving at Rutherford, she wasn't alone. The administration tried silence at first. They hoped the storm would burn out. But by Friday morning, a local news station had picked up the story. A headline blared across TV screens in the cafeteria. Rutherford University professor mocked black student in viral video. Micah walked in just as the segment aired. Forks froze midair. Conversations stilled. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Some looked guilty. Some curious. Others resentful. As if her mere presence had brought scandal upon their school. Langston didn't show up for class that day. A substitute appeared instead, mumbling about unexpected faculty obligations. By Saturday, the university could no longer stay quiet. They released a statement on their official Twitter. We value diversity, equity, and inclusion. We take concerns of bias seriously. Miss Carter will be granted entry into the gauntlet pending review of procedures. It was corporate, hollow, but it was enough to ignite a second wave of outrage. Let Micah compete became watch Micah win. Micah didn't celebrate. She knew what this meant. They hadn't admitted they were wrong. They hadn't apologized. They had simply opened the door so that when she walked through, the whole world could watch whether she stumbled. She doubled down on her training. Her nights grew longer, her simulations harder. She studied Langston's problem-writing style like a detective, studying handwriting samples. Every loop of chalk, every tendency to disguise complexity behind simplicity. But the atmosphere on campus shifted into something volatile. In the cafeteria, groups grew quieter when she passed. In lecture, students stared openly at her notes, whispering. A boy muttered "Quota Queen" under his breath as she walked by. The petition had given her entry, but it had also painted a target on her back. The morning of the gauntlet arrived electric with tension. Toasters lined the hallways. Students buzzed with excitement, voices rising in anticipation of spectacle. For most, it was entertainment. A show, a chance to watch the underdog burn, or unthinkably rise. Micah entered the lecture hall with her usual calm. Her hair tied back, her hoodie plain, her face unreadable. She carried nothing but a pen and her notebook, though she wouldn't be allowed to use it once the competition began. She found her seat near the front. The room was already half full, whispers crashing like waves against the walls. Phones angled discreetly, capturing every move she made. She placed her bag under the chair and set her notebook on the desk. That's when she saw it. A piece of chalk, snapped clean in half. And beneath it, scrawled in block letters across a torn scrap of paper, "Know your place." Micah stared at it. The room seemed to dim, the whispers fading into a low hum. She picked up the chalk, rolled it between her fingers once, then set it back down. Her face remained unreadable. But inside, fire spread through her veins. Langston stepped onto the stage at that exact moment, smiling thinly as he scanned the crowd. His eyes landed on her, and he smirked like a man who still believed the script was his to write. The lecture hall had been transformed overnight. The folding chairs were gone, replaced by stadium-style seating that climbed in rows up to the ceiling. Floodlights hung from the corners, glaring down onto the whiteboards set up along the front wall. A large projection screen hovered above the stage, programmed to display every problem, every equation, every slip. This wasn't a classroom anymore. It was an arena, and the whole university was watching. The Calculus Gauntlet was broadcast live on the Rutherford Network, streamed to thousands of laptops and TVs across campus. Flyers promised free pizza and dorm lounges, hosting watch parties. Even alumni tuned in online, eager to see which senior would etch his name into tradition. But tonight, no one cared about the seniors. They cared about her. Micah Carter, transfer, freshman, anomaly, the only black competitor, the only woman on stage, the one they had tried again and again to keep out. The contestants filed in one by one, each taking a seat behind their designated whiteboard station. Micah felt the hum of the lights against her skin, the restless shuffle of the audience above. She placed her hands flat on the desk in front of her and breathed slowly. The murmurs rippled instantly. There she is. She looks nervous. She's not lasting 10 minutes. Cameras zoomed in. The projection screen magnified her face, catching the calm set of her jaw, the slight narrowing of her eyes. She didn't give them fear. She gave them silence. At exactly 7 p.m., Langston strode onto the stage, dressed in a dark suit instead of his usual blazer. The crowd cheered, not for him but for the ritual of the gauntlet itself. He lifted a microphone, his voice magnified through the hall. "Welcome, Rutherford, to our 37th annual Calculus Gauntlet." The applause thundered. "This year," he continued, "we have 7 contestants. Our brightest minds. They will face 20 rounds of problems, from fundamentals to creative applications. Each contestant has a buzzer. The first to buzz in will answer on the board. A correct answer earns points. A wrong answer deducts. After 3 hours, one champion will remain." His eyes flicked briefly toward Micah. A smirk curled his lips. "And for the first time, we welcome a transfer student." Let's see how she fares. The audience chuckled. The spotlight shifted to her, waiting for her reaction. Micah didn't move. Round 1 began. The first problem flashed onto the screen, a limit approaching infinity, disguised behind nested functions. Buzz. A senior leapt forward, chalk scratching fast across his board. Correct. Applause. Second problem. Buzz. Another senior. Correct again. The pace accelerated. Buzz. Answer applause. Repeat. Micah sat still, hands folded, eyes steady on the screen. She didn't buzz once. Whispers surged through the audience. She's frozen. Told you she's overrated. She can't handle the pressure. Langston's smirk widened. By the 10th question, Micah still hadn't buzzed. Her competitors racked up points, their names climbing the scoreboard projected on the screen. Kevin Harmon, the favorite, was in the lead. But Micah was waiting, watching, mapping. She studied not just the problems, but the rhythm of Langston's delivery, the hesitation before he clicked to the next slide, the cadence of his voice. She studied the way her opponents lunged at easy points, sloppy in their rush. She was playing a different game. Question 11 appeared. A double integral disguised as a probability density function. Micah's eyes narrowed. Buzz. Her hand was first. Gasps rippled through the room as her name lit up on the board. She rose calmly, chalk in hand, and began to write, not frantically, not nervously, with precision. Each line unfolded like music, the solution blooming across the board until the final answer stood clean at the bottom. Langston's jaw tightened. He cleared his throat. Correct. The audience erupted. From there, everything changed.
Problem 12. Buzz. Micah again.
Correct. Problem 13. Buzz. Another contestant tried, stumbled. Micah seized the rebound. Correct. Problem 14. Buzz. Micah's board filled with graceful lines. Correct. Whispers turned to astonishment. She's actually good. She's killing them. Wait, she's better than Kevin. The scoreboard began to shift. Kevin's lead shrank. Micah's points climbed, steady and relentless. Langston's smirk faltered. His tone sharpened as he announced each new problem, his eyes flicking to her more often. But Micah remained untouchable. By the end of round 1, she was in second place, just behind Kevin. The room buzzed with uneasy energy. The live stream chat exploded. To Micah math. Watch her work. Langston fake. Viewers clipped moments of her solving, replaying the calm flow of her chalk strokes, the elegance of her logic. Students who had mocked her 2 weeks earlier now texted each other in disbelief. Still, not everyone was impressed. She's getting lucky. She'll burn out in round 2. And one whispered sharply in the audience. She doesn't belong here, no matter how good she is. Round 2 began. The problems grew harder. Multivariable optimization, abstract algebra, questions designed to break rhythm. Contestants began sweating, hesitating before buzzing. Micah buzzed again, and again. Correct. Correct. Her calm was unnerving. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She waited for her moment, then struck with precision. By mid-round, she was tied for first. The audience leaned forward, murmurs rising. And then it happened. Problem 17 flashed on the screen. A proof involving convergence of series. Micah's hand darted to the buzzer. She was first. The light above her desk glowed. But Langston's voice cut through. Kevin, go ahead. The room froze. Micah's light was still glowing, her hand hovering above the buzzer. Kevin blinked, surprised, then scrambled to the board. He scrawled a solution, wrong, then corrected himself, finally landing on the right answer. Points awarded. The audience erupted, half in cheers, half in confusion. Wait, wasn't it her buzzer?
I saw the light.
She was first. Micah sat motionless, her face calm, but her eyes dark, sharp, fixed on Langston. He didn't meet her gaze. He clicked to the next problem, voice smooth, as if nothing had happened. The scoreboard flickered. Kevin's points jumped ahead. Micah's stayed frozen. And Langston smirked, the faintest curl of satisfaction tugging his lips, as the audience murmured louder than ever. The room buzzed with confusion after Langston skipped Micah's buzzer. Half the audience had seen her light flash first. Phones in the crowd had captured it. But Langston had brushed past the moment, his voice smooth, his authority unchallenged. Kevin grinned from the board, as his score leapt higher. Micah sat still, her hands folded, her face calm. But inside, a quiet storm brewed. She had a choice. She could protest, demand correction, disrupt the gauntlet, and hand them the story they wanted. The angry black student who couldn't handle the rules. Or she could recalibrate. She chose recalibration. Micah studied Langston with a new intensity. His pacing, the rhythm of his voice before each problem, the way he tapped the clicker twice before changing slides. She realized he had a pattern, subtle, but there, a rhythm she could anticipate. The next question flashed, a vector calculus transformation. Langston barely finished reading it before Micah's hand hit the buzzer. The light flared. This time he couldn't ignore it. "Micah," he said reluctantly. She rose, chalk in hand, and solved it with flawless precision. Correct. Buzz. Another problem. Correct. Buzz. Another. Correct. One by one, she began to dismantle the board. She didn't just answer quickly. She answered cleanly. No wasted motion, no scribbled detours. Her solutions looked like polished proofs from a textbook, lines flowing like poetry. She wrote with such confidence, it unnerved the others. After the fifth consecutive point, whispers rippled through the audience. She's actually dominating. 10 minutes ago she was silent. She's seeing through the problems. By the 10th in a row, the room had shifted. The laughter was gone. The murmurs grew hushed. Even the students who had mocked her now leaned forward, eyes wide, watching something they couldn't deny. The scoreboard glowed. Kevin. Micah. Others trailing far behind. Langston's smirk faded. He began clicking faster, rushing the transitions. His voice clipped as he read the prompts. He wanted to knock her off balance, to break her rhythm. But Micah had already adjusted. She wasn't playing catch-up anymore. She was predicting him. Every flick of his wrist on the clicker, every slight pause before announcing the next problem, she mapped it. Her buzzer sounded milliseconds faster than the others. Again and again. It wasn't luck, it was strategy, resistance through precision. At the back of the hall, professors shifted uneasily in their seats. Dr. Alvarez whispered to Dr. Kim. She's not just solving, she's anticipating. Almost like she's reading him. Kim frowned. Langston can't let her win this. Alvarez glanced at the scoreboard. I don't think it's his choice anymore. The live stream chat exploded. Micah dominates. Shock queen. Langston loses. Clips circulated within minutes. Micah's calm face, her lightning-quick buzz, her flawless chalk strokes. Her name trended across campus and beyond. Students from other universities tuned in, leaving comments about how Rutherford's golden boy was being dismantled by a freshman transfer. Every correct answer became a strike against the narrative Langston had built. Every line of chalk was resistance. By the 15th correct answer, the crowd was silent. Silent in awe, silent in disbelief. You could hear the scratch of her chalk echo in the hall, the sound of domination written in white across the board. Kevin's shoulders sagged, his buzzes grew slower, others barely tried anymore. It was Micah's game now. Langston's jaw tightened. He shuffled his note cards, sweat beaded faintly at his temple. For the first time, he looked unsettled. Micah's eyes never left the problems. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Then came the twist. Midway through round 3, as Micah chalked yet another correct solution, one of the seniors, Bryce Langley, slammed his buzzer down. The sound echoed like a crack through the hall. "This isn't fair," he said, voice sharp, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "She's using something, some kind of unauthorized method." The room erupted in murmurs. Langston's head snapped toward him, surprise flashing across his face. He hadn't planned this, but the opportunity glittered in his eyes. "Explain," Langston said smoothly, his voice carrying. Bryce jabbed a finger at Micah. "Nobody buzzes that fast without a trick. She's anticipating the questions somehow. Maybe she hacked the system. Maybe she's got some device. But this isn't normal." Gasps filled the room. The accusation wasn't about math. It was about legitimacy. About painting her brilliance as theft. Micah lowered her chalk slowly. She turned, face calm, eyes sharp. "Unusing my mind," she said evenly. Her voice didn't rise. It cut. "That's all I've ever used." But the damage was done. The word cheating lingered in the air. Heavy, sticky, familiar. The same shadow Langston had cast weeks earlier had returned, this time amplified. Public. Langston stepped closer to his microphone, his smirk creeping back. "Perhaps we should pause to investigate," he said, eyes glinting. The crowd stirred, tension crackling, and for the first time all night, Micah felt the weight of the stage tilt against her again. The accusation still hung heavy in the lecture hall. The word cheating spat like a curse, lingered in the air, long after Bryce Langley slammed his buzzer. The audience buzzed with uncertainty, whispers thick with prejudice disguised as suspicion. Langston fed the tension like fuel, suggesting an investigation, his smirk betraying the trap he'd been building since the semester began. Micah stood silent at her board, chalk dust clinging to her fingers. She did not plead, she did not bow. She simply stared into the white space before her, jaw set, breathing measured. But inside she knew this fight wasn't about math anymore. It never had been. It was about whether the institution could erase her brilliance before the world truly saw it. And then, someone else saw her. Someone who had been watching all along. Dr. Elijah Banks sat in the back row of the faculty section, quiet as always. Few noticed him anymore. His gray beard blended with the dim lighting. His tweed jacket was older than most professors on the floor, and his seat always in the corner made him easy to forget. But once, decades ago, Elijah Banks had been the math department's star. He had published on topology when Langston was still in high school. He had guided generations of students, many of them black, many of them poor, many of them told they didn't belong in rooms like Rutherford's. Then the department shifted. Younger, shinier hires arrived from Ivy League pipelines. Banks's classes were reassigned. His graduate students pushed toward other mentors. By the time Langston arrived, Banks had been all but erased, tenured but sidelined, kept in the margins of a field he once helped define. Yet Banks never stopped teaching. He never stopped believing. And when he saw Micah Carter's name on the gauntlet list, something old stirred in him. A memory of every student whose genius had been crushed under institutional weight. So he began to watch, quietly, closely. That night, when the hall finally emptied, and the whispers trailed into the rain-soaked campus, Banks found Micah sitting alone at a table in the library. Her hood was up, her notebook open, her pen motionless in her hand. He cleared his throat gently. "Miss Carter?" She looked up wary. Few professors had spoken to her with kindness in weeks. "I'm Dr. Banks," he said. "I taught calculus here before Professor Langston ever knew what a derivative was." Micah blinked, unsure if it was a joke. Banks smiled faintly, pulling out a chair. "I've been watching you, and I think it's time we talked." They sat in silence for a moment, the library's fluorescent hum filling the gaps. Then Banks leaned forward. "You know what they're doing, don't you?" Micah's lips pressed into a thin line. She nodded once. "They've written your story before you had the chance to tell it," Banks said. "First the surprise quiz, then the accusation, the qualifier, and now this nonsense about unauthorized techniques. It's not about math, it's about narrative. If they can't beat you fairly, they'll brand you unfair." Micah's throat tightened, but she didn't speak. Banks slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed documents, gauntlet archives from the last 10 years, rubrics, score sheets, committee notes. He tapped one page with a steady finger. "Notice anything?" Micah scanned quickly. All the winners. All white, all male. None had been asked to pass a qualifier. None had been accused of using unauthorized methods. The pattern was undeniable. "They've sabotaged you," Banks said simply. "And they'll keep doing it. Unless you change how you fight." Over the next week, Banks met with Micah in quiet corners of the campus. Old classrooms left unused after hours. Study lounges no one visited. He didn't feed her new equations or impossible problems. She didn't need more math. What he gave her was perspective. "You've been playing on their terms," he told her one evening, as rain pattered against the window. "You're trying to prove you belong by beating them at their game. But their game is rigged." Micah frowned. "Then what's the alternative?" Banks leaned forward, his voice calm, measured. "Don't play for them, play for the math. Let the work speak louder than their sabotage. They can twist rules, they can smear your name, but they cannot erase what everyone sees with their own eyes. When you solve with such clarity they have no room left to lie." Micah stared at him. The words cut deeper than encouragement. They reframed the entire battle. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about transcendence. In their sessions, Banks shared pieces of his own story. How in the 1980s, he had published a proof that was later attributed to a white colleague. How committees had sidelined him, not for lack of brilliance, but because brilliance wasn't enough when it came in black skin. "I spent years trying to outwork the system," he admitted. "Years trying to prove I was undeniable, and I was. but they buried me anyway. That's when I learned, the only way to resist isn't just to win, it's to win so cleanly, so beautifully, that everyone watching remembers you long after the system forgets. Micah listened, every word carving itself into her. She saw her own fight reflected in his scars. Something shifted in Micah after those nights. When she returned to practice, her approach changed. She no longer trained with the desperation of someone trying to silence doubters. She trained with the calm focus of someone who understood the math itself was her ally. Every problem became less about victory and more about clarity. Each line of chalk became an act of resistance, not against equations, but against erasure. Banks watched her, quietly proud. "You're ready," he told her one evening. "Not because you'll beat them, but because you no longer need to." One late night, Banks stayed longer than usual, in his office, digging through departmental files. Something had gnawed at him since Micah's qualifier. The timing of the rule change, the committee's silence, the way Langston's smirk always seemed to know more than it should. He opened his email archive, scanning through threads, and then he found it. A faculty group chat. Not official, not professional, a side channel where professors joked, complained, mocked, and there, in black and white, were messages that chilled him. Carter's persistence is laughable. Wait until the qualifier crushes her. Imagine the headline if she actually makes it to finals. Rutherford beat by a charity admit. We can't let that happen. Don't worry, even if she wins, we'll review the footage. Students forget fast. Banks scrolled further, his pulse quickening. One message stood out, dated the night before the gauntlet. Tomorrow, no matter what happens, we spin it. She doesn't win. Period. His hand trembled slightly. As he closed the laptop, they weren't just biased. They were plotting. Actively. Shamelessly. Banks rose from his chair, fury burning beneath his calm. He knew Micah couldn't fight this alone anymore. But if he revealed what he'd found, he'd be risking his own career, his last shred of influence. Still, he whispered into the empty office. They think she's playing their game. They have no idea what's coming. Dr. Banks barely slept after discovering the faculty group chat. The words burned into him. She doesn't win. Period. He knew the machinery was stacked against Micah, but reading the proof of it, their laughter, their plotting stripped away any illusion of fairness. Still, when dawn broke, he told himself what he had told Micah. Don't play for them. Play for the map. Micah didn't know about the chat yet. She didn't need to. She was already walking into the arena, as though every step was measured, calculated, precise. The gauntlet had entered its final stages. Hours had passed. Contestants looked drained, sweat dampening their collars, chalk dust streaking their fingers. Kevin Harmon's once confident strokes had turned sloppy. Bryce Langley's shoulders sagged, his earlier protest barely a memory now drowned by his low score. But Micah was steady, her face calm, her body language unreadable. She wasn't showing fatigue. If anything, she looked sharper than when she began. The 17th problem appeared on the screen. A brutal convolution integral disguised as a probability density function. The kind of problem that made even professors pause. Buzz. Micah's light flared. She walked to the board, chalk resting lightly in her hand. She studied the equation for a long beat, long enough that the audience began to murmur. Then, instead of attacking the integral with brute force, she began to sketch. Lines, arcs, shaded regions. At first, the crowd thought she was stalling. Some even chuckled. But slowly, her drawing took form. She had mapped the problem as a geometric flow, the density shifting like waves across a shore. Her lines showed the relationship, the limits of behavior, the symmetry hidden inside the tangle of symbols. Then, with the picture in place, she wrote 3 clean steps, and the solution emerged. Correct. The audience gasped. She didn't even calculate it, whispered a professor in the back. She saw it. Dr. Alvarez leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. She's visualizing the relationships. That's not memorization. It's intuition. Langston's face tightened. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain control. Interesting approach, but perhaps oversimplified. Banks, seated behind him, muttered under his breath. Oversimplified? That was elegance. The next problem appeared. A topology question disguised as a set theory proof. Normally it would require pages of notation. Micah buzzed in again. She didn't write paragraphs. She drew overlapping loops, shading intersections, mapping boundaries with a clarity no one expected. Her proof wasn't pages, it was art. She stepped back, dusted her hands and looked at Langston. That's the answer. Langston forced a smile. Explain your reasoning further. Micah tilted her head slightly, patient. The loops show closed sets. The shaded areas show the transformations under the function. What looks complex reduces to symmetry. The rest follows naturally. Even the department head leaned forward, eyes narrowing not in doubt, but in awe. He whispered to the colleague beside him. She's not solving these problems. She's seeing through them. Correct. Round after round, Micah shifted the air in the room. She wasn't rushing anymore. She wasn't even competing. She was rewriting the very definition of how the gauntlet was played. Some students leaned forward with awe, their faces glowing with something like belief. Others sat stiff, uncomfortable, because what they were watching didn't fit the story they'd been told about who genius belonged to. Langston's smirk had evaporated entirely. He began fumbling, his voice clipped, reading problems too quickly, interjecting after her solutions, with pedantic challenges. Are you sure that holds in the general case? Yes, Micah replied calmly, pointing at the loop she'd drawn. Here's why. And what about under nonlinear transformation? She circled a shaded region. That's accounted for. It collapses to symmetry. Her logic was airtight, elegant, unshakable. Langston's challenges only made him look petty. By the 20th problem, the scoreboard flashed the unimaginable. Kevin Harmon, Micah Carter, others trailing far behind. A tie. The entire hall buzzed with disbelief. Professors whispered furiously in the back. Students clutched their phones, streaming updates across social media. Micah method began trending. Clips of her drawing loops and arcs spread online. Captions reading, "She's not calculating. She's seeing." Langston tried to steady himself. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and spoke into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we arrive now at the final round. One last problem. Winner takes all. The crowd roared. Micah stood calm, chalk in hand, eyes fixed on the screen. Her breathing slow, her voice silent. Inside she heard Banks's words again. Don't play for them. Play for the math. She wasn't here to beat Kevin. She wasn't here to prove Langston wrong. She was here to show the truth. That brilliance couldn't be boxed, couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be erased. The lights dimmed slightly. The final problem flickered onto the screen, and the entire hall leaned forward, holding its breath. The scoreboard glowed at the bottom of the screen. 28T, one problem left. Everything hinged on what happened next. The scoreboard still glowed at the front of the hall. 28T, one problem left. One final round. The energy in the arena was unbearable. Students leaned forward in their seats, whispering furiously. Professors in the back row exchanged glances that ranged from awe to discomfort. Phones lit up across the audience as live stream comments flooded in. Hashtags trended faster than the moderators could follow. Micah stood in her place, chalk dust faint across her sleeve, her pen resting in her notebook. Calm, silent, her eyes never leaving the board. That's when her phone buzzed. It was discreet at first, a vibration against the wood of her desk. Micah frowned. Contestants weren't supposed to receive messages mid-competition, but phones weren't banned. Most had theirs stuffed in pockets or bags. She slid hers up, careful not to draw attention. On the screen, a new email from Gauntlet Admin, Rutherford. Subject: Final Prep. Do not Body: Attached official prep doc for final problem. Review immediately. For eyes only. Attached was a PDF labeled Final Problem Prep Confidential. Micah's pulse quickened. She tapped the file open. Inside were 5 pages of equations. They looked like gauntlet problems, but slightly off. A convolution integral here, a vector transformation there, but with twists she didn't recognize. Symbols shifted strangely, assumptions written in odd shorthand. It was meant to feel authentic. Micah's first instinct was suspicion. She had studied every archive of the gauntlet. Never had official prep been sent to contestants mid-event. And why only to her? Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, sharp and clear. If it feels off, it probably is. Micah leaned back, scrolling slowly, letting the weight of it sink in. Each problem was almost right, but wrong in subtle ways. The kind of wrong that would trap someone who trusted too quickly. Her breath steadied. This wasn't help. This was sabotage. She closed the file without hesitation, deleted the email, slid the phone back into her bag. She would not touch it again. Her eyes lifted to the stage. Langston stood at the podium, one hand resting casually on the microphone. His other hand lingered near his phone, face tilted downward as though waiting for something. His jaw tightened briefly, then relaxed. Micah saw it. He was waiting for her to stumble. The atmosphere grew denser by the second. The crowd could sense the stakes but not the shadows behind them. Some whispered that Kevin would win. It was tradition, destiny. Others whispered that Micah had already proven enough, but no one in the audience knew about the email that had just landed like a blade at her feet. Only she did. And perhaps Langston. The scoreboard still glowed. The hum of fluorescent lights blended with the restless energy of hundreds of eyes. Micah folded her hands calmly. She wasn't here for their tricks. She wasn't here to play their game. She was here for the math. On stage, Langston adjusted his tie again. He checked his phone once, twice, his thumb twitching across the screen, as though impatient for a result. For the first time, the mask slipped. He wasn't the smug orchestrator anymore. He looked unsettled. Dr. Elijah Banks noticed from his corner in the back. His sharp eyes missed nothing. The nervous phone check, the faint gleam of sweat at Langston's temple. Banks's jaw set. They've gone this far? Sabotage in plain sight? He wanted to shout, to storm the stage, to call out what he knew. But he didn't. Not yet. Because Micah didn't need saving. Not from him. Not anymore. Langston lifted the microphone, voice steady but strained. Ladies and gentlemen, the final problem, winner takes all. Our two leaders, Kevin Harmon and Micah Carter, are tied at 28. This round will determine the champion of Rutherford's 37th annual calculus gauntlet. The applause that followed wasn't uniform. Some cheered with excitement. Some clapped stiffly. Eyes narrowed, their loyalty to tradition cracking under the weight of what they had seen. And a few in the shadows of the audience smirked knowingly, those who had sent the email. Micah closed her eyes for one beat. She thought of the note slid under her door weeks ago. You don't belong here. She thought of the qualifier, the red-marked homework, the whispers of quota C. She thought of her mother, of the trophies gathering dust, of every step that had led her here. And then she thought of Banks's voice. Don't play for them. Play for the math. Her chest rose slowly. She opened her eyes. She would not be shaken. The screen flickered, and the final problem appeared. It wasn't any of the twisted ones from the email. It was worse. A problem spanning multiple fields. An optimization hidden inside a triple integral, wrapped in probability, masked with a piece of linear algebra. A monster, designed not just to test skill, but endurance. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even some professors looked uneasy. Kevin's hands trembled slightly near his buzzer. Micah's stayed steady.
Buzz.
Her light flashed first. She rose calmly, chalk in hand. The auditorium was silent now. No whispers, no laughter. Every eye tracked her to the board. Even the live stream chat slowed, as if holding its breath. She stared at the problem for a long moment, scanning every line, every hidden trap. Then she did something no one expected. She drew a circle. Gasps echoed softly through the hall. She wasn't starting with equations. She was mapping the problem visually, reducing the chaos into symmetry. She sketched shapes for the functions, arrows for the transformations, shading for the probability flows. Each stroke was deliberate, a language she alone seemed to speak. Then, slowly, she wrote equations, not sprawling but tight, elegant, anchored to the visuals. One fed into the other, reducing complexity into simplicity. What looked impossible began to collapse into clarity. The professors in the back leaned forward. She's seeing it again, Alvarez whispered. Kim muttered, I've never seen this method taught here, or anywhere. Langston's jaw clenched. He stepped forward, microphone raised. Perhaps you'd like to explain why you began with a circle. Micah didn't turn, because the problem isn't about the algebra. It's about the symmetry. The circle shows the invariance. Once you see that, the rest falls apart. Her voice was calm, sharp, undeniable. The chalk moved steadily, her proof unfolding like a story, each step built on the last, her visuals anchoring her equations. The monster problem was tamed line by line. Langston began to sweat. His smirk long gone, his eyes darted between the board and the scoreboard. He gripped the microphone tighter. Are you sure your assumption holds for the transformation domain? He pressed. Micah circled a shaded region. Yes. The symmetry accounts for it. Check the boundary conditions. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was final. The audience erupted in murmurs. Even those rooting against her could see it. Her logic was airtight. Micah wrote the final line. The answer. Clean. Elegant. She set the chalk down gently, stepped back, and folded her hands. Silent. Then the scoreboard flashed Micah. Correct. The crowd exploded. Cheers, gasps. Disbelief all colliding in a roar. The live stream chat flooded. Micah win. The method. Play for the math. Kevin's shoulders slumped. He didn't even attempt to buzz. Langston's face was stone. And then, just as the crowd's roar peaked, a voice cut through. Objection. It was Bryce again. The same senior who had accused her earlier. He leapt from his seat, face red, pointing toward Micah. She cheated again. That circle nobody solves like that. It's a trick. She had help. The crowd gasped. Langston's lips twitched. The opening he needed had returned, handed to him like a gift. He leaned into the microphone, voice calm, rehearsed. Perhaps we should review her solution before awarding the win. The cheers faltered. Whispers rose again. Doubt spread like smoke. Micah stood silent, steady, but her heart thudded harder than ever. The scoreboard still glowed with her victory. But above it, the microphone in Langston's hand carried his words across the hall. Final result pending committee review. The crowd froze, and the battle was not over. The roar of the crowd hadn't faded from the last round when the final scoreboard flickered on the giant projection screen. Micah, Kevin, others, irrelevant. But Langston's voice cut through like a blade. Final result pending committee review. The cheers faltered, the audience whispering, buzzing with confusion. Micah stood still at her board, her chalk-streaked fingers resting lightly at her side. Her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, but she felt the weight pressing down. They weren't going to let her win, not cleanly. And then came the announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, Langston said, his smirk returning like a mask snapping back into place. Because of the closeness of the scores, and in the spirit of fairness, we will now proceed to one last decider problem. The crowd gasped. Some applauded, hungry for more spectacle. Others frowned, muttering, "That's not in the rules." But Langston kept his tone firm, ironclad with authority. One problem, proof-based, solved in real time. Whoever completes it correctly first is the champion. It wasn't fairness. It was another trap. The screen flickered, and the problem appeared. Prove or disprove. For all real-valued continuous functions fx, the transformation t defined as t, fx, d, fx, d, fx, d, d, preserves uniform convergence in the space of bounded functions. The words sprawled across the screen like a wall of thorns. This wasn't a quick solve. This was a graduate-level proof problem. Multi-step requiring both derivation and logic, structured argument, and deep understanding of function spaces. The audience murmured uneasily. Even professors shifted. This was the kind of problem that could take hours on paper. Yet Langston expected an answer live, under the clock. A timer appeared above the screen. 20. Kevin's face drained of color. He began scribbling furiously on his board, chalk squealing against the surface. His movements were frantic, lines crossing out, arrows pointing nowhere. The other contestants tried, half-heartedly, their boards filling with jargon that collapsed on itself. Panic spread. The audience could see it, the collapse of method under pressure. And then there was Micah. She hadn't moved. She stood before the problem, chalk held loosely at her side, eyes closed. The audience grew restless. What is she doing? She's freezing. She doesn't know where to start. But inside, Micah wasn't frozen. She was dissecting, visualizing, pulling the problem apart in silence. She pictured the transformation as motion, functions flowing into new forms, integrals reshaping them, convergence bending under weight. She mapped it like rivers feeding into a lake, some steady, some unstable. She could almost feel the answer, hovering like a hidden thread. Banks's voice echoed in her memory. Don't play for them, play for the math. Her eyes opened, calm, sharp. She lifted her chalk. Her first lines weren't calculations, they were anchors. She wrote definitions cleanly: continuity, boundedness, uniform convergence. She built the skeleton of the proof before touching the flesh. Kevin glanced at her board, panic flashing in his eyes. His work was already a mess. Half erased, smudged, incoherent. Micah's was pristine, like laying the foundation for a cathedral. 5 minutes in, she moved faster. Her steps were deliberate, each line feeding the next. Arrows crisp, logic flowing. She wasn't rushing, she was constructing. The crowd began to notice. She's not floundering. She's building something. She's actually proving it. Langston's jaw tightened. He shifted uneasily behind the podium. At 10 minutes, Micah's proof had taken shape. She had mapped the transformation as a bounded linear operator, showing how it acted within the space of continuous function. Her arrows pointed to diagrams, intervals shrinking, errors flattening under uniform convergence. She was blending rigor with intuition. Each step followed with clarity, each symbol tied to a visual explanation. The board looked less like frantic work and more like a lecture, a story unfolding. The professors in the back leaned forward. Some whispered in awe. Others frowned, unsettled. She's seeing the transformation as geometry. No one teaches this way. It's elegant. Banks, watching silently, allowed himself the faintest smile. 15 minutes. The timer ticked down. Kevin was drowning in half-erased equations, sweat dripping down his temples. He muttered to himself, scribbling nonsense that collapsed. As soon as it touched the board, Micah's lines grew bolder, faster. Her once slow pace now accelerated, the final pieces clicking into place. Her board was nearly full, yet perfectly organized, left to right, top to bottom, no wasted space. The crowd leaned forward, whispers replaced by silence. All eyes on her. Even the live stream chat slowed, transfixed. 5 minutes remaining, Langston announced, his voice thin. Micah's hand flew across the board, chalk scratching in rhythm. She was no longer thinking step by step. She was channeling. The logic lived in her bones now, flowing straight onto the board. Kevin had stopped entirely. He leaned against his desk, eyes glazed, staring at the collapse of his proof. The other contestants sat back, defeated, their boards irrelevant. Micah alone kept moving. 2 minutes, Langston said. His throat sounded tight. The last lines emerged. Her conclusion clear, airtight, undeniable. Micah circled it, dropped the chalk, and flipped her board around just as the timer hit 0. The hall was silent. Not a cheer, not a whisper, just hundreds of eyes fixed on her board, reading the proof line by line. The judges at the front leaned in. The department head adjusted his glasses, lips moving as he scanned her work. Another professor scribbled notes, tracing the logic. She completed it, one whispered. And it's correct. Not just correct, it's beautiful. Banks closed his eyes briefly, his chest heavy with pride. Micah stood calm, hands folded, her board glowing under the lights. Langston rose slowly from his chair. His face was stone, his eyes dark. He stared at the board for a long beat, jaw tightening, his hands gripping the edge of the podium. Then, into the microphone, he said the words everyone had been waiting for. I cannot, in good conscience, declare this solution valid. At this time, gasps tore through the crowd. What? It's perfect. She proved it. The professors at the front looked at him in shock. Even Kevin raised his head, bewildered. Langston's smirk returned faintly. We will need to review the solution privately. Until then, the winner cannot be declared. The audience erupted into chaos. Boos, shouts, protests, phones shot up, recording streaming, posting. Hashtags surged across the internet in real time. Micah stood still, calm, her face unreadable. She had expected this, but the storm was coming. As the crowd roared and faculty scrambled, Langston turned sharply, locking eyes with Micah. His lips curled into a thin smile as he leaned into the microphone, one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, this gauntlet is not over. The auditorium was still buzzing with chaos. Students shouted across the rows, some demanding that Micah be declared the winner, others clinging to the narrative that tradition couldn't be broken. Professors huddled in the corner, whispering urgently. Cameras flashed from every angle. Micah stood calm, chalk dust still on her hands, her board filled with the flawless proof she had built under fire. The scoreboard above her still read, Micah, 30, Kevin, 20. But Langston's voice had cut it all down. This gauntlet is not over. He thought he had sealed the story. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that his microphone was still on. Langston turned his back to the crowd, leaning toward one of the judges. He thought his words were private, meant only for the inner circle. His voice was low, but the mic clipped to his tie picked up every syllable and broadcast them across the hall. "No way I'm letting her win this," he muttered. "Not after all this. I'll bury it in review if I have to." The words echoed through the speakers. The room froze. Then pandemonium. Gasps filled the air. Students leapt to their feet, phones raised, capturing the moment. He said it out loud. He admitted it. He's rigging it. The live stream chat exploded in real time. Caught in the act.
Let Micah win.
Langston exposed. Within minutes, clips spread across Twitter, TikTok, Reddit. His voice, crystal clear, became the most damning evidence of all. Not just bias but intent. Micah didn't flinch. She stood in the center of the storm, her expression calm, her silence louder than any outburst. Langston fumbled, tugging at his mic, his face blanching as he realized what had happened. "That wasn't what I meant was." But it was too late. The truth had already left the room, and was racing through every device on campus. By midnight, the story had hit local news stations. "Professor caught sabotaging student in live competition," flashed across television screens. National outlets began circling. The university's PR office scrambled, issuing a vague statement about miscommunications and review processes. But the damage was done. Students marched across campus that night, holding signs outside the math building. "Math is for everyone. Stop rigging the system. Justice for Micah." Hashtags multiplied. Nultratin math. Gauntlet Gate. Micah deserved better. 2 days later, the university was forced into action. An emergency hearing was scheduled in the largest lecture hall. Faculty, administrators, students and cameras packed the room. At the center sat the committee. Langston, pale and tense, sat at one end of the table. Micah sat at the other, quiet but unbroken, Dr. Banks at her side. The Dean of Academic Affairs opened the hearing. "We are here today to address allegations of misconduct during the 37th Annual Calculus Gauntlet." The room hummed with tension. Students were called first. Some who had watched live testified about seeing Micah's buzzer skipped, about her calm brilliance, about Langston's mic slip. One junior stood at the podium, trembling but resolute. "We all heard it. He said he wouldn't let her win." "That's not education. That's sabotage." Then came Dr. Banks. He rose slowly, his presence commanding despite his years. His voice was steady, deliberate, every word chosen like a proof laid brick by brick. "I have taught at this university for 3 decades, he began. "I have seen students rise and fall. I have seen brilliance nurtured, and I have seen it buried. What happened to Ms. Carter is not an isolated mistake. It is the culmination of a culture that has for too long dismissed students who do not fit its mold." He paused, letting the weight settle.
"I reviewed Ms. Carter's work. It was correct. It was elegant. It was undeniable. The only thing under review here is whether we as an institution have the courage to face the truth."
The room erupted in applause. Langston's face burned red. After hours of testimony, the committee huddled. The crowd buzzed, phones raised, hashtags flying even as the deliberations dragged on. Finally, the dean returned to the microphone. "Professor Langston is hereby suspended, pending a full investigation. The committee will also review the final results of the gauntlet." The hall roared. Micah sat still, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. She knew this was only part of the battle. Suspension wasn't justice. It was delay. But the tide had shifted. The whispers that once mocked her were now chants in her favor. The narrative was no longer Langston's to control. That evening, the university sent out an email to all students. Subject: recalculated gauntlet result. Body: after review of submitted solutions and scoring procedures, we have reached a final determination. Contestants will be informed privately, before the public announcement. Micah read it twice. Her chest tightened, not with fear but with something heavier. They were calling her in. Privately. As she walked toward the dean's office the next morning, envelope in hand, students lining the hallway whispered her name. Some smiled with encouragement. Others glared with quiet resentment. She reached the office door, knocked once, and stepped inside, unsure if the truth would finally be honored, or rewritten again. The door to the dean's office had been heavy, its oak frame lined with brass that reflected the morning light. Micah had stepped inside with steady feet, knowing that whatever verdict waited for her was no longer just about her. It was about the thousands watching, the students marching outside, the professors whispering in corridors, the ones who would come after her. The result, when it came, was quiet but seismic. Micah Carter, champion of the 37th Annual Calculus Gauntlet. The announcement went public within hours. The clip of her proof replayed across national news outlets. Headlines read, "Black transfer student exposes racism, wins university's most prestigious math competition." But Micah didn't celebrate with champagne or victory speeches. She went back to her dorm, closed the door, and sat on her bed in silence. Her chalk-stained hoodie still clung to her skin. She thought of her mother, of long nights spent over problem sets, of Dr. Banks's words, "Play for the math." For the first time, she allowed herself a small, private smile. Weeks passed. The campus was still buzzing. Students wore t-shirts that read, "Micah Method." Alumni sent letters to the administration demanding systemic reform. Langston's suspension stretched into an indefinite leave, whispers of resignation growing louder each day. The university, desperate to repair its reputation, made a public gesture. At the semester's closing ceremony, the dean stood at the podium, cameras flashing. "We are proud to announce the creation of the Micah Carter Mathematics Scholarship, awarded annually to underrepresented students pursuing advanced study in mathematics." The applause thundered. Micah sat in the front row, her face calm, her hands folded. She accepted the plaque with grace, her silence carrying more weight than any speech could. But the scholarship wasn't enough for her. She wanted something lasting, something alive. So she agreed when the department offered her a position as a part-time tutor. Not just to help students pass exams, but to build a tutoring lab, a space where anyone, regardless of background, could learn without fear of mockery or dismissal. And where did she choose to set up the lab? Room 3B, the very classroom where Professor Langston had first mocked her. The first day she walked back into that room, the memories came sharp and uninvited. The smell of chalk dust, the rows of desks, the long blackboard stretching across the wall. She could still hear his voice, dripping with arrogance. "You're probably more of a stats girl." For a moment, her chest tightened. But then she exhaled, long and steady. This was no longer his room. It was her. She set her bag down at the desk, picked up a stick of chalk, and walked to the board. The surface was clean, waiting. She wrote the day's problem in broad, steady strokes. Find the limit. The board glowed with the familiar elegance of E, the number that had fascinated her as a child, the symbol of growth and infinity, a perfect beginning. When she turned around, the room was already full, not seniors or elite competitors, but freshmen, transfer students from community colleges, students from small towns, students whose faces reflected a spectrum of backgrounds. They weren't there to mock. They weren't there to wait for her to fail. They leaned forward, notebooks open, pens ready. Micah's eyes swept across them, and for the first time she saw not suspicion, not doubt, but hunger. She smiled. A small smile, but real. "Let's begin." The weeks that followed reshaped her entirely. Teaching wasn't about dominance. It wasn't about proving brilliance. It was about translation, taking something dense and abstract and making it visible. She used her method. She sketched shapes, drew arrows, shaded regions, built intuition before equations. Students who had once stumbled found themselves nodding, seeing the problems not as walls but as puzzles they could play with. Word spread quickly. By mid-semester, her tutoring lab was packed daily. Students sat on the floor, lined the walls, just to catch a glimpse of her chalk strokes. For the first time in Rutherford's history, the math lab had a wait list. One evening, as she erased the board, she heard a slow clap from the doorway. Dr. Elijah Banks stepped in, his tweed jacket familiar, his beard grayer under the dim lights. "You've done it," he said softly. Micah turned. "Done what?" "Taken the room they used to bury you in, and made it a place of growth." She smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone." Banks's eyes softened. "No, but you lit the path, and paths outlast the people who walk them." He placed a folder on the desk. "Keep this safe. You'll need it." She frowned. "What is it?" "A record," Banks said. "Proof of everything they tried to bury. Emails, messages, evidence of the sabotage. I may not be here forever, but your fight is bigger than this room." Micah placed her hand on the folder, her chest heavy. "Thank you." By the end of the year, the university hosted another ceremony. This time, the atmosphere was different. Micah wasn't a scandal or a headline. She was a symbol. They unveiled a plaque outside the math department. The Carter Lab for Mathematical Excellence. Founded. Students applauded. Professors stood stiffly, some still begrudging, others finally smiling. Banks stood in the back, his hands clasped, his eyes shining.
Micah said nothing.
She simply touched the plaque with her fingers, as if grounding herself in the permanence of it. One quiet evening, after a long day of teaching, Micah sat alone in room 3B. The students had gone, the chalkboard still littered with diagrams of integrals and loops. She was erasing slowly, savoring the rhythm of the chalk against slate. A knock came at the door. A student worker handed her a sealed envelope. From the dean's office, the student said. Micah thanked him, waited until he left, then opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Dear Miss Carter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been nominated for the National Mathematics Rising Scholar Award. This honor is reserved for students whose contributions demonstrate not only exceptional brilliance, but also resilience and leadership in the advancement of mathematical understanding. Her breath caught. She set the letter down on the desk, her fingers trembling slightly. For the first time, the institution wasn't burying her. It was lifting her up. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Micah picked up the chalk again, walked to the board, and wrote one word in bold, clear strokes. Begin. She turned around to face the empty room, imagining the eager faces that would fill it tomorrow, and the day after, and the years to come. Her lips curved into a smile. The prodigy was just getting started. Outside the window, the campus bustled with students, unaware of how far her influence would reach. The letter lay open on the desk, the nomination glowing under the fluorescent light. And somewhere deep inside Micah, a fire burned brighter than ever. They tried to silence Micah, to make her feel small, but her truth was louder than their lies. How many voices like hers are still being buried in classrooms, offices, and streets today? If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, type yes for justice, and subscribe if this broke your heart.